Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Robert Schmid, also known as Mr. IoT. I am the Chief IoT Technologist for Deloitte with a deep passion for all things digital. This week on Coffee with Mr. IoT, I'm talking with retired General Brent Baker, also now the VP at PTC. General, welcome to the show. Happy Veterans Day. Thank you so much for joining us on your day off.
Robert, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be with you today. And it's actually a real pleasure to be representing veterans really across the globe. Thanks so much for having me.
Happy Veterans Day, General. I actually wanted to ask you something. I'm a little bit sort of, do I call you General? Do I call you Brent? And really, I just want to be respectful to you and all the veterans out there. So
it's interesting. Of course, you can call me Brent. I'll answer pretty much to anything. But it's interesting. Once you make general officer, you're kind of a general forever, even though you're retired. So most people still call me General. But it's totally up to you. I'm going to leave it up to you.
Well, I'm definitely going to call you General then. It's an honor. It's actually, I have to say, looking at your resume before, it's impressive, right? I mean, you came out of being enlisted and made a general. A two-star general. This is a very unusual path. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. It's interesting today to look back on my career. My entire family has a long history of serving in the military, and I had an uncle I was very close to that served in the Marines, 2 tours in Vietnam, and I'd always wanted to go in the military. I was actually going to go in the Marines, because he was in the Marines, and he said, "Oh, no, don't join the Marines. Join the Air Force." So that's what I did. I joined the Air Force, and I spent 6 years as an enlisted member, which I'm very proud of that fact. I really cherish my enlisted time. And then I was very fortunate to get selected to go to officer training school and then become an officer. And then I served in the Air Force for additional 31 years. So I served right at 37 years total. And very fortunate, I got to be a commander 7 times, which I really love, working with folks, working with people. And I just look back and I had a wonderful career, and it was an honor to serve my country, to be quite honest.
Well, thank you for your service. It's impressive. I want to know, so, I looked at your resume also a little bit in terms of what you have done, and at the end, you ran an organization of, I don't know, was it 80,000 people and 60 billion of logistics revenue? Is that true? I mean, these are sort of the numbers that I got. Is that right?
That is true. I was the vice commander for Air Force Material Command within the Air Force, and it's the largest command inside the Air Force, and it's a large amount of people. It's like, you're exactly right. It's like 60,000 people and an $80 billion a year budget. It's about I think almost 40% of the entire Air Force's budget runs through Air Force Material Command. And I was actually very happy and honored to become the Vice Commander Air Force Material Command, because if you're a logistician like I was in the Air Force, that's kind of the command that you want to be in, because you're responsible for cradle to grave management of all weapon systems in the Air Force. So I got to work with such programs like the F-35, KC-46 program, everything that the Air Force procures and takes care of. I was, partly at least responsible for helping manage that.
Did you get to fly some of those awesome planes?
Well, I was not a rated guy, so I didn't get to fly, but I think I've flown in probably every one of the cargo aircrafts that we have, like the C-17, C-5, KC-135. And then I was very fortunate I got to fly in F-16, which is a fighter aircraft, 2 times. And then I got to fly in the F-15 when I was stationed in Iceland, which is a really unique place. And I got to fly with a guy named Captain Flanagan. His nickname was Father. And he let me fly the plane for about 20 minutes, and it was a lot of fun.
That sounds amazing. That sounds really amazing. I've always looked, there is, I'm sure you know this, but for civilians like me who want to do this, there's an opportunity to go to Russia or some former Soviet Union country where they have fighter jets and you can fly in those. I just haven't done it. But you talked about nicknames. Do you have a nickname?
I actually have a couple of nicknames. I don't have any great story how I got them. So since my last name is Baker, everyone calls me Bake. So that's kind of been a term, I guess, somewhat of endearment through the years as this Bake. And then I also, for many years, was called Cowboy because I'm a huge Dallas Cowboy fan. And so they just kind of affectionately called me Cowboy. So in the Air Force, it's kind of good to get a nickname. In some of the other branches, you don't necessarily want a nickname, but I've always had a couple.
Oh, really? There's other places where they don't want you to have a nickname?
Well, my son is a HH-65 rescue pilot in the Coast Guard. And at least right now, I don't think he has a call sign, because if you get a call sign in the Coast Guard, it usually means you've done something wrong or funny, or you kind of messed up to get your nickname. So he's proud of the fact he does a call sign right.
Oh, interesting. That's interesting. A call sign equals a nickname. So, General, let's switch topics for a little bit. And you can take it back anywhere you like at any point. But I'm just curious. So one of the things that always fascinates me is we talk about the Internet of Things a lot today, right? And really, it's been something we've talked about in the industry for about maybe 5, 6, 7 years. I mean, it's been around long, I know that, but it's been a topic of conversation. But really, I mean, the military and you and your job, you've connected things to networks way, way longer than that. When was the first time you were really involved in connecting things? Do you have any sort of interesting stories and interesting comments about that?
I think you're exactly right. We talk about the Internet of Things today, and that's kind of a new term that a lot of folks are talking about smart connected assets and products. But it's interesting. The military is kind of led in this space for quite some time. For instance, a lot of our engines have had sensors for many years and been able to provide usable data in that form. We've also had Air Operations Center, where we've connected people and assets and information from around the globe to be able to lead like air operation campaigns. And so you're exactly right. The military for many years has really kind of led the way in the Internet of Things, even though that term is a relatively new one.
How does someone get from managing 60,000 people and 80 billion? I mean, any CEO would be proud to have this on his resume or her resume, right? And you have this, but how do you get to? How did that lead you to PTC?
It's an interesting story. I had a chance to meet Jim Heppelman, who's the president and CEO of PTC, and he was talking things about IoT and digital twin and digital thread and connecting assets and augmented reality. And I really saw PTC because I thought, it's neat to be part of a technology company that's leading the way. And then I also saw on the other side, this could really be helpful, especially to the Department of Defense and to what we actually call the warfighter, and it could make a significant difference for our country. And so that's really how I ended up with PTC.
I have a funny story for you. I haven't talked about this publicly, but in my first meeting with Jim, I've known Howard for a little bit, and he's sitting there, Jim, Howard, and always there's a lot of other executives around, right? And Jim talks, and then I notice how Howard interrupts Jim, and they have this really intense conversation right in front of me. And I go and sit there and go like, this is interesting. Howard treats Jim very different than all the other executives in the room. To walk out to find out that Howard and Jim are brothers, right?
That makes a difference.
It does, but it's nice. So it was this interesting thing, right? It was a respectful conversation, right? But there was this sort of like, you could tell there was a brotherly connection there, and I didn't know that before, but it was kind of fun. So I'm curious, you could have picked probably many other companies, but why PTC? What did they have that you liked about their Internet of Things story?
I think when I looked at PTC, I kind of saw the vision that this company has, which is, I believe it's the industry leader, quite frankly, of how you take all these connected assets, connected products, and you start tying them together end to end. And for many years, especially in aerospace and defense, we've always kind of talked, like very vertically about different products. Well, now I'm starting to see how these are all connected horizontally. And like you can create something in the CAD tool, and then on the other end of the spectrum to use that for put in a cloud environment and a BBC.
Generally, you break
See, almost 2 years ago, or 2 years now, when I started, there was very few like IoT applications in aerospace and defense. And a year and a half later, here we are. I mean, we could spend this whole time just talking about the different applications because people are really starting to see how valuable this IoT and connected products and assets, how important that really is.
If you're just joining us, I'm Robert Schmid, the Chief IoT Technologist for Deloitte, and you're watching Coffee with Mr.IoT. Today, I am talking to my guest, General Brent Baker, retired and now VP at PTC. And we're talking, it's a special Veterans Day edition, but we're also talking about business and all those kind of things. So tell me, one of the things you talked about tracking assets. And, often I find that we track assets in the industry, but gosh, you had to track weapons and individual pieces. How was this tracked 10 years ago, and how is it tracked today? And how does that relate to other industries about tracking assets? Just curious.
Well, I think 10 years ago, we had very good management of the assets around the globe, but it was primarily tracked through spreadsheets and databases and heavy use of tools like that, and it was always lagging. In other words, it was always pulled down and truncated and put together at some point. But today that is changing significantly, and we're having immediate tracking, immediate value of tracking of assets. And a great example is we work with one client right now that's tracking all of their tools within their entire company. So they've got RFID tags on their tools, are able to track where their tools are. They get real-time information, which helps the mechanic be able to sign in quicker. They know where their tools are. We don't have to worry about losing tools or leaving a tool inside the engine and lost tools and all of that. So I think what I'm seeing is I think we had good management, but it was always kind of lagging. And today, this connected assets and IoT brings immediate tracking, immediate value, and it really gives you immediate insight into your organization.
How much lagging was it, or can you not say because otherwise you have to go and...
No, I think most people understand. It was lagging like maybe like a day. In some cases, you would pull information from the day, and then you would get it the next day once the computer turned over. We remember those days that you would process it, and the next day you would get this information. So to me, it was effective, but it was always kind of lagging. Where today IoT gives you immediate insight into your operation, and it's real time. I think that's the real key. You can see stuff in real time.
It's interesting. I always look at this, and so question for you I have about the connectivity, right? One of the things that again the military had early on was really great networks, but very closed off, right? It was all really protected and inside, and you were either inside or you were outside. Much of what we do today, also PTC, we allow on-prem, but really much of what happens in the cloud. And some of it is what we call the public cloud, really, which is a bit of a misnomer, right? Because public just means it runs on public networks. Is this something that gets adopted today also by the military, the public cloud, or is everything still in the private cloud for them? And what does the cloud mean in a military environment?
That's actually, Robert, that's actually a really great question, because just in a couple of years I've been working with PTC, we've seen a significant change. So the military is very careful, especially in the area of cybersecurity, and rightfully so. They have to be very careful that our programs aren't hacked and attacked and all of that. So they've been very, very careful to kind of keep things behind a firewall. But we see that is changing now. And matter of fact, the Deputy Undersecretary of Defense within the last couple of months has put out a guidance letter saying, hey, we have got to get to a cloud. And so that could be a military cloud. It could be a commercial cloud. But we're seeing that the military is seeing, the power of a cloud service. And so we're starting to see a transition now. I think it'll be a little slower than maybe like a commercial company, just because of all the concerns around protecting our data. But our leadership is really seeing that, everything, I tell folks when I go talk about everything is going to the cloud. We got to make that transition. We have to be careful about cyber, but we can't use cyber, in my opinion, as an excuse to do nothing. And so just in the last few months, we're seeing a pretty significant change.
I gotta believe that I often find cyber, as you said, we can't use it as an excuse, and it's exactly that. It's an excuse rather than one of the things you have to look out for. And not just when you connect things. I mean, cyber is a topic for anybody, right? We're people, right? We never talked about the Internet of People, we just call it the Internet. And it's actually people who often are the ones who miss a step in sort of connecting things. So cyber is not really, it's something we have to do rather than an excuse. I wonder, would you say that actually the military, in a sense, had really an advantage in this case because you have thought of this way before many of us have thought of it?
I think the military does have an advantage. And, sometimes an advantage can be a positive and a negative. I think the advantage is the military for years has been very sensitive and very good about protecting against cyber intrusions. But at the same time, on the flip side of that, that could mean they're slower to move to kind of new technology like IoT or cloud. But as I said earlier, I think we're starting to see some movement in that area, which I think is really good. One thing that we don't talk about enough, which I think we need to discuss more openly, is how IoT, I believe, can really help in the cybersecurity area, because when you think about connecting assets and you think about machine learning and you think about artificial intelligence, you start understanding that, like, if somebody does try to intrude or try to attack you, IoT is smart enough to know that and can alert you immediately. So I think there's some positive things that maybe we haven't fully thought of that will really help the military move like the cloud environments and start connecting more assets.
I mean, I gotta believe some of the assets you are protecting to know real time where the asset is. That's on its own might not be a cybersecurity, but it's definitely a security advantage and a threat reducing factor to know if certain parts of your inventory move to places you don't want it to move. So there's gotta be, it's sort of like we talk about theft prevention in retail. Talk about theft prevention in your area, right?
That's a great analogy. And one I like to talk about is how you use your credit card. So you have your credit card, and if you use it or somebody steals it or uses it in some country that you're not in, they know that immediately, and you get a fraud alert. Well, I think the same thing on the military. You're exactly right. If somebody is intruded into your system and they're trying to move something around or they're trying to mess with something, the way it's set up, you're going to know that immediately. And I think that's a good thing, because one of the biggest challenges we have is a near peer competitor trying to get in and mess with something internally that you don't know about. So I really believe that as we start using IoT more and connected assets and artificial intelligence and machine learning, I think the military will probably eventually say, this could be a really good thing for us. But again, we have to be, as a country, we have to be cautious, but we are moving down that path now.
I always have this, I don't know, I'm sure when this happens to you, right? I use my credit card, I travel a lot, right? And I use it at different places, and it gets fairly frequently blocked for them saying, what are you doing there? I thought you were here yesterday. And they call me, and then they apologize very profusely about hindering my credit card flow. And I'm always saying, no, thank you. I appreciate for what you do, because you're protecting me, you're trying to help me. This isn't sort of like a thing that's actually against me. So I have two questions, and it's the same question, but from different angles, and it's sort of like with 20 minutes in. When you look at what you have today as technology available to you that you didn't have before when you worked as a general, what's the stuff that you're glad to have today, and what's the stuff you're missing technology-wise?
Well, I think in the past, we've always had fairly good technology, but the Department of Defense in particular, it just takes a long time to acquire it. And one thing I noticed as I left the Air Force and joined a private, a leading company in all of this technology is when I was in the service, I thought a lot of our issues, which I call the intractable issues, were a technology problem. And what I've quickly discovered is it's the exact opposite. There's plenty of technology to solve our problems. The issue is how do we go out and acquire them and bring them in? And that's what, you know, I kind of struggle with every day. A lot of folks look at this technology like, oh, this is exactly what I need. But then the acquisition process can be years. And you start thinking about the F-35. I mean, even though it's here now, we're starting to see F-35s in the field, that program is probably 10 to 15 years old. So it just takes a long time to acquire this technology. And at the same time, if you think about what's going on, this technology is changing constantly. Even since I've joined PTC, you know, we brought in all kinds of augmented reality, virtual reality. We have a new offering called Euphoria Chalk, which you can, you know, see something on somebody else's, you know, iPad or smartphone. And so it's the technology is changing so fast. The real challenge is how, you know, commercial companies, and particularly Department of Defense and major OEMs, how do they acquire this technology before it's already even moved on?
So what technology do you miss from your days in the military?
I think that probably the biggest thing that I miss, you know, from being in the military is just having the standard programs that I grew up with, if that makes sense. And so now I'm working for a leading technology company that's moving real fast. And sometimes that can be hard for a person that was used to a system that had been around for 30 years. And so that doesn't happen, as you know, in the commercial environment. I mean, our technology is changing almost, you know, weekly or monthly. And so that's probably the only thing I miss is it was a lot easier world when you were familiar with a tool that had been around for, you know, 20 or 30 years.
Some consistency is good.
That's right.
I ask you the same question about personally, sort of like what do you actually, you know, I talked about tech first. I wanted to take it to you, right, personally. What are the things that you appreciate having today personally that you didn't have before? And I'm gonna have a guess, which I'll tell you afterwards. And then what do you miss from the days from in your military to today? So like really on a more personal level as a closing question. So to get to know, I want to say big, but I'm gonna say general instead.
That's a great question. I actually get that question quite a bit. They talk about, you know, as you transition out of the military, went to the private sector, what do you really miss? And I like to tell folks, you miss the people, you miss the camaraderie, you miss the you know, the common mission of you know, defending the country. But it's really interesting that as I moved into PTC, the company, I'm very blessed, I think has some of those same attributes. You know, it's a very friendly company. We work very well together, a lot of camaraderie. So it's been a very easy transition, quite frankly. When you're in the military, you hear all these stories about being out in the private sector and, you know, it's stab everybody in the back and I at least with the company I'm with right now, I have not seen that. And it's been quite the opposite. But I'm also very excited about the technology that we're bringing forward. When we talk about the Internet of Things and, you know, AR, VR, and, you know, all these different tools I've talked a little bit about today, I really think, quite frankly, they're significant. I think they're game changers. This industry, I think even in our country, smart connected assets, things are really changing fast, which I think is a really good thing.
How are you going to spend the rest of Veterans Day, General?
I'm actually I'm going to continue. I'm working a little bit today and maybe take a little bit of time off this afternoon. I'm actually working on a presentation that I'm doing over the weekend. Somebody asked me to come and give a, you know, Veterans Day presentation, so I'll maybe work on that a little bit. And that's really about it. Maybe just enjoy the day.
Well, General Brent Baker, I just really appreciate you being here. I really want to thank you for the service you've given to the country and to me in that way. And please enjoy your Veterans Day. Happy Veterans Day. And with that, I just want to say, please, this is the end of Coffee with Mr. IoT. And please join me again next Friday, 9 a.m. Pacific, noon Eastern, for another Coffee with Mr. IoT. And by the way, if you missed any of today's conversation, come and watch today's episode or past episodes on my YouTube channel. And with that, thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody. Happy Veterans Day. Take care.
Take care.